You're listening to the Ethos Podcast.
Hi, and welcome to this Ethos Podcast. My name is Dr. Nick Broughton, and I'm Managing Director of Ethos Pharmaceutical Ethics and Compliance. And I'm joined today by two colleagues who I've known a long time in the pharmaceutical industry, Dr. Ravi Pawar and Dr. Shuli Porkes. And I'm just going to allow them to introduce themselves before we get into the topic of decision making.
Hi, I'm Ravi Pawar, and thank you, Nick, for inviting me to this podcast with yourself and Shuli. I've been in medical affairs for about 12 years and in the clinical trials industry for a decade before that, in various posts, so lots of experience around difficult decisions as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been a signatory for about 12 years as well.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Shuli Porkes. Again, thank you for inviting me. Delighted to be here. I'm a pharmaceutical physician. I've been in the industry for about 20 years in a variety of posts, broadly medical affairs, but also some clinical development, and also served as the Director for Research, Medicine and Innovation at the ABPI. So a different range of perspectives on decisions and different types of decisions.
Yeah, thank you. It looks like we've got, as we hoped, the right people in the room to discuss this. What we're going to talk about today, just to go into a little bit more depth on that, is the difficulty sometimes of making decisions in what we do within the pharmaceutical industry. Obviously for me, and I know particularly for Ravi, it's decisions about what's right and wrong in terms of promotion of medicines and approval of materials. And what we want to debate today is, how do you make a good decision? What gets in the way of good decision making? Ravi, any from your experience making decisions about promotional campaigns and signing off materials and non-promotional activities, what do you think the essence of a good decision making is about?
Good question, Nick, and it's actually quite a broad question. Because for me to make a good decision, whether it's an individual level or as a group, you need to know what it is you're trying to achieve first and why you're doing what you're doing. Because without that, you get mired in personal beliefs, you get sidetracked, and you start looking at detail without knowing the big picture. So for me, you always have to have the intent as to why am I doing this. And if you're not sure, I think you need to go back to square one, or the group needs to go back to that and get that clear first. Why are we doing this?
Yeah.
And then that helps all the other decisions fall into place sometimes.
Yeah, and common understanding about
Absolutely.
what you're all aiming for, I see, within a team. Yeah, Shuli, what's your early reflections on that?
Yeah, so a great question, and it's actually made me think about when I first joined the industry as a reviewer, reviewing materials, and that, within the first few weeks, few months, sort of I remember getting frustrated with, why isn't there a clear answer? Yeah. How do I decide whether this can, this is provable or not? There's not it's not definitive. And actually that kind of that understanding of actually you are making a decision, but there's not necessarily always a clear, this is the right answer, this is the wrong answer. You need to kind of make the decision on the information you have and the context you have at the time. And I think that changes over time. So obviously as an individual, I kind of approach decision making differently, but actually more importantly, the wider context changes over time. So to Ravi's point, really important to keep going back and checking in, what is it you're trying to do? What is the end game, if you like? So the kind of that understanding of there's not necessarily a clear
answer,
100% right answer.
I agree, obviously, with both of those points. Firstly, what are we all trying to achieve? What's this decision working towards? And are we all on board with the goal? And that can be missing, I think, in teams. And we've got evidence from research that shows that medical and marketing teams often don't share a clear common goal. 5 out of 10 is about the average score if you survey people on that question as to whether they've got a clear goal. But a critical thing, and I think it's is to realise that decisions can be really tough and there isn't a clear answer. And I think that to me is a problem in itself sometimes. And when you're working with people who understand that there isn't an easy answer, that's much, much easier, in terms of, I find, if as a signatory making decisions about what to sign off. I was in a meeting just yesterday where somebody said, so I find it so frustrating that medical people disagree about the right answer. And, well, you will disagree about, because the answers can be difficult. So it's that to me is I always find difficult to explain any. I'll give you some thoughts on how I try and explain it, the difficulty making decisions. But any thoughts on how you explain to somebody who's new to industry, and often is people who are new, that decisions can be really tough, and there is certainty is not always there. In fact, it very often isn't.
Yeah, I think for me it's the appreciation that there are different perspectives on what you are doing. So say, you do whatever, you say, okay, I'm making a decision that we will do activity A. Some people will see that, great, we can go ahead and do that. Others will go, well, actually, there's some risk associated with that. Others might go, well, actually, fine, you can do it, but it's a waste of time. It doesn't do, whereas other people might appreciate that you're doing that. So that being able to hold multiple perspectives rather than a polarizing it's right or it's wrong, I think is a real skill. And then explaining to people, actually, different people see it different ways. And I think this is particularly important. Earlier I said about context changing. If we look at the nature of pharmaceutical industry within society, actually things have changed. And actually, for example, having patient voice in there is super important in a way that wasn't acknowledged years ago. And things like understanding that context of healthcare systems, and so it's really important that people know there are multiple perspectives and you have to take them into account. Whether any of those individual voices actually means that they get the decision their way or not. Yeah, it's just part of the equation. But in terms of explaining it to people, saying it's not just about me sitting here saying yes or no, it's actually about understanding that context, which has multiple voices or perspectives in it.
Yeah, and that is a skill, isn't it, in making a decision to try and put yourself in other people's shoes as to how they will, because that's what you're going to have to negotiate as the consequences of your decision roll out. Ravi, any thoughts on getting across that importance of understanding the difficulty of decision making, and that the absolute truth is not as easy as some people think, if you like?
No, I fully agree that you've got to take in the multiple viewpoints, and therefore you need the right people at the table from the outset. Mm-hmm. And the only way I can think about explaining it, and I'll probably come up with better ways later, is to relate it to life outside that situation. So, from when you're choosing a school, whether you're deciding what to do after school, do you go to college, do you go to university, do you take an apprenticeship, or do you have no choice and therefore it's easy? But none of those decisions are straightforward. And then after that, we know with jobs, there's big decisions. Marriage, life, divorce, there's always big decisions. And there isn't always a clear-cut, straightforward answer. Yeah. It depends whose shoes you're sitting on.
Yeah, right? Yeah. I mean, to some extent, I often think that, it is black and white in a sense that you have to make a decision. You either do this thing or you don't do this thing. You sign this claim off, you don't sign this claim off. You get divorced or you don't get divorced. But the decision process to make, or the process to get to that black and white action point is difficult. And people often say, oh, it's grey, well, everything's so grey, as if that's going to go away, as if that's a problem with it, or that we should be able to solve. I always say, if you don't like grey, go and work in a pie factory or something where you don't have to think about what you're doing in your next bit of your job, because the job is about making difficult decisions in grey areas often. That's interesting. I mean, my personal way of trying to explain the difficulty of decision making is I talk a little bit about confidence intervals around decisions in compliance. Yes. And sometimes I'm very confident of the right answer. You can't say that. You can say that. And I know that most people will agree with me. But there are times when I'm not really, I don't know. You might be able to persuade me, and is this right? And I might just sign something off. But I know that my confidence intervals are wide. And if somebody else looked at it and said, well, I'm not happy with that, I wouldn't be particularly surprised. What I can't afford to be doing, though, is making decisions that are completely out of kilter with other people in my position. That's when I'm not doing my job, I suppose, will be my reflection on it. Yeah. Do you think Ravi, do you think that the medical and compliance teams can cause a problem in this idea of certainty of decision sometimes? Are they a bit dictatorial occasionally?
They can be.
Yeah.
And I think it's very easy for medical and compliance to be put in the role of the police people, right? And that's when things go wrong.
Yeah.
You're taking away the overall accountability of the team to make that decision together, and somebody comes in saying, thou shalt do this.
Yeah.
Makes life easy in a way, because they'll just tell you what to do, but that doesn't necessarily lead to good decisions.
Yeah.
In short.
It gives that clarity people want. They just want an answer that they can get, but at the same time, you're not training the other people to make a decision. I've often heard people say that we were told in the past the code says you can't do that.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't the code saying that or the PMCPA saying that. It was actually somebody who'd made a decision and said, well, that's the position, and there is no, there's no right.
I think in this job, certainly, and probably in a lot of industry in senior positions, you have to be comfortable with a degree of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And that grey. Like
Yeah.
you said, Nick, it's never going to go away.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Code can change, AI can come in, but some of that grey is always going to be there.
Yeah.
And you have to be comfortable, and therefore you need the right people around you as well to be able to take decisions and be confident that you're comfortable with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, not confident that they'll always be right, but
And with grey and difference of opinion often comes disagreement and argument and debate. Any sort of reflections, Julie, on because in truth, in a healthy team, there should be some disagreement and debate and arguing if people are passionate about things. But there's clearly a balance there. Any thoughts on that side of things?
So yeah, I think handling disagreement is one of the key parts of decision making. It's not just making the decision, it's being able to explain it. And I think the concept of trying to explain the concept of the grey zone, if you like, is really helpful to be able to then explain, I've made the decision because yes, it sits in the grey zone, but these are the reasons. And it may be by explaining those reasons that actually something comes to light that you'd not thought of and does change your decision.
Yeah.
Or it may be you say, actually, no, it's still as it is. But then it is part of making the decision, is having the responsibility to explain to others who are impacted by your decision why you've made it and what led you to make that decision. And I think that being able to explain why you've made the decision is sometimes, it's very easy for people to say, oh, the code, as you said, the code says no. But actually, maybe the code doesn't say no, but it's a combination of, what you think about the claim, a previous case you've seen somewhere, previous company precedent, something else. But actually explaining that detail is important, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I also think it there needs to be background work in teams in terms of handling disagreement, in the sense that, particularly after the pandemic and now people are working more remotely, they're not spending as much time together. Yeah. And they've sometimes never been in the same room. And I always think it's much more easy for disagreement to become harmful when you don't know somebody. It's much more You know, if people know each other and they're friends and respect each other, even if they're not friends necessarily, but they've spent some time chatting to each other, talking about each other's home life and stuff, or that having met makes such a big difference. And if you don't invest time in your team as a team, the disagreements, I think, carry a greater risk of becoming problematic going forward. The thing that sometimes in decisions, and particularly decisions in ethics and compliance, or and reviewing materials and activities, the thing that I find people sometimes struggle with is how they handle what they think is the right thing to do versus what the compliance rules say or the regulations. And we don't tend to talk too much about that. There's probably a tendency in the industry for saying, these are the rules, follow the rules. You know, what you think isn't that important. And I think that's completely wrong. But I wondered if you had any thoughts on that. How do people incorporate their own ethical perspective in decision making, perhaps?
Interesting question. So I think there's two bits, isn't there? One, the rules don't say you can't do that, but your ethical perspective says, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Which is then that's really interesting. So how do you own that and explain to the rest of the team, I don't think we should do it because of X, Y, Z, and then the team going, yeah, but that company did it last week, and so that way around. The other way round. So that's I guess there's a lot of onus on the individual to, own their opinion and explain it to the team. The other way round is where you really, really believe you should be doing something, but the rules say no.
Yeah.
And I think that is more challenging, because actually, if it's really clear the rules say no, I think you're going to be holding that risk on your own, and unless you've got a lot of people around you who say, yes, we will back you, that's really difficult. And then that becomes that is more about something to roll up into, say, the industry view of what should be in the next version of the code of practice, or whatever it might be, where you say, actually, why do I think we should be doing this and the rules say no? Do other people hold that? How do we then, whilst maintaining safety and all the rest of it, but how do we actually evolve the rules to maybe adapt for change? I mean, one example is, what's social media done, and these sorts of things, where you say, okay, the rules still fit for purpose, and or are they okay?
Any thoughts on that, Ravi, on the ethical side of things and how you incorporate that personal ethical view into decisions?
It's a good question, because it's difficult. I mean, Shirley talked also about the when the rules say you shouldn't do it and you feel it's the right thing to do. But the other way around is also challenging, when the rules allow you to do something. And I'm trying to think of an example. Last week I was discussing freedom of information requests. Now, there's nothing that doesn't stop you doing those in the right situation. But is it ethical if you're sending those to very busy professionals and taking them away from their day jobs? There might be business advantages to doing that, but is it the right way to do it?
I mean, when we talk about that challenge of personal view, when I in some of the training that we do, and it's always like the first bit of training, because I think these things are so important. I mean, and we also spend a lot of time talking about the difficulties with some decisions, and decisions aren't clear. But to me, the key thing is to make it clear to people that your personal view comes first in the decision process. That's the way I look at it. That the first question about an activity or a claim or whatever, or any business decision, is not what does the law say. It's almost the first step is to forget the law and the code and the company SOPs, and ask yourself whether you can ethically justify it.
Yes.
Because if you can't, my position always is, well, that's the end of the decision as far as you are concerned. We can't ever ask people to do something they feel is unethical. I mean, we all have to do things we may not agree with, in the sense of we think it's the wrong strategy, or we don't think those are the best messages we could use. But if it's unethical, that's quite different.
Yeah.
And it's the first thing, to me. Now, I think to that second position you said, where people say, well, I think it's ethical, but there's a rule against it. That's the next step in the decision, because sometimes you think, this is a good thing to do, but the law says you can't. And unless you're prepared to break the law or the code and take the consequences of that, then it's probably not a good idea. But it's that order of process. Nobody should be doing something they think is unethical just because it's compliant. That to me would be slightly bizarre. I'm interested in, you mentioned, I have a list of lousy reasons to do things, lousy justifications, and one of them is other companies do it. And my test of a lousy justification is if I'm stood in front of the appeal board at the PMCPA and they said, why did you do that? And my answer is, other companies do it. I know it's a rubbish answer, you see. Are there any other things that you think people use to justify their decisions that are sort of actually alarm bells, do you think?
I mean, I think one we can probably all relate to is yes, but it has to be signed off now for, insert time reason, whether it's like the Congress is starting in 3 hours or, the agency need to have the final thing because they've got to print it or whatever, all those sort of somebody else's time deadline, meaning where you go, actually that's it's just an artificial deadline.
Yes.
Actually.
Yeah.
And if we need time to talk about this, then and to or actually you just can't do it, then in this way, someone else's deadline isn't the reason.
Again, if you're in front of the appeal board and they said, why did you sign that off? And you said, well, we only had an hour. Yeah. It wouldn't fly as a reason.
The only sort of exception I could see to that if there was something where you had a direct patient who needed an immediate clinical decision, but in most of the stuff we're talking about with signing off materials, that is not going to be relevant. Yes, I think that would be mine. I don't know.
I've had one where, but it's already been printed.
Yeah.
We spent £30,000 on it.
On printing it.
Great.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Still not again,
going ahead.
and I was that test in front of the appeal board. The worst one I always think for people personally, which I've had, is, but you signed it off before. Yeah. Because actually, that seems like a good reason to sign it off again, but you might have been wrong before, and we do make mistakes, and sometimes you get a different perspective, and I suppose that's another thing about decisions. You've got to be able to say, well, sometimes I make the wrong decision and I may need to make a different decision next time. But that can be a tough one, I always think, where you've got to actually say that my decision last time, I hadn't thought about a particular perspective. Often these sorts of arguments, I think, or where people say other companies do it, or you've signed it off before, or the other medic signed it off and you didn't. They're strategies we all use in life to win arguments. If you're having a row with somebody, or a discussion with your partner, you might say, you use these sorts of things to win, but they're not good justifications for action. So how in a grey area, what is the essence of a good justification, do you think? That's a very difficult question.
Patient focused, I think, is one thing we can all always have at the top, and I think most of our cross-functional colleagues would agree.
I agree with that very much. That we don't. If you're taking some risk with a decision, some compliance risk, you can only counter the risk you're taking with the patient benefit of what you're doing, and we're not very good at describing that. You can't say I took those risks because we wanted to make more money or increase market share. But if you make a particular claim, because it's in the patient interest and there were things you need to correct, that's a much better argument. And we're not good at that, perhaps, sometimes, at describing the patient benefit of what we do.
Yeah, and I think sort of building on that, it would be that different stakeholder perspective. So I'm not talking about the internal sort of brand team, but actually, looking out beyond your laptop, beyond the company walls, and saying, actually, is there a broader reason? So it might be the patient perspective, the clinical perspective, something else that makes you say, actually, yeah, this is important because of those wider considerations beyond our individual company or brand.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just sort of for a final challenge to you, and I'm going to put you on the spot with all of these things, but maybe thinking about somebody who's a good decision maker that you've come across in pharma. What are their characteristics? How would you describe that person that made them somebody who actually thought, yeah, you know what you're doing when it comes to decision making?
Interesting question, and I think it's easier to respect somebody as a good decision maker when they appear calm and they appear to have considered that decision.
Yeah. That's a really good point. It's not really something that's occurred to me, but if your whole body language says panic, then everybody, particularly for senior people, then people panic, and that's not necessarily helpful. But looking calm in decisions and being considered is good.
Well.
Considered is a good thing. So you feel that's the sort of critical.
From my point of view, I know that if I look at somebody for a decision and they're not running around and panicking and going, I will respect their decision more.
Yeah.
Might not be right, but...
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I agree that feeling of calmness is really important, and I think linked with that, the confidence to ask for more information or more time if needed, but being able to balance that with not continuing to ask for lots and lots and lots of information and delaying putting the decision off. But for when we were talking about time pressured decisions, actually sometimes being able to say, no, we need to pause this or delay this by a day because we need to make this decision.
Yeah. No, that's really great, and thanks for your thoughts on all that, and see you again next time. Cheers.